April 29, 1945. 10:17 a.m. Private First Class. John DeGrow from Pittsburgh opens a boxcar door on a railroad siding outside Dachau. He's 22 years old. He survived Anzio, Normandy, the Ardennes. He thinks he's seen the worst war can offer. He's wrong. The door slides open. The smell hits him first. Then he sees them. Bodies, stacked floor to ceiling. Men, women, emaciated beyond recognition. Some are still breathing, barely. One of them reaches out a skeletal hand toward DeGrow. The hand falls. The man dies while looking at his liberator. DeGrow steps back from the boxcar. He doesn't cry. He doesn't scream. Something else happens. Something breaks inside him. Something that can never be repaired. And when he sees the SS guards 2 hours later, well-fed, arrogant, smirking, that broken thing inside him makes a decision. The rule book doesn't apply anymore. Within 3 hours, approximately 50 SS guards will be dead, executed, shot against walls, thrown from towers, beaten to death by the prisoners they tortured. And the American officers who could have stopped it will choose not to. Some will participate. The photographs will be buried, the reports will be burned, and General Patton will declare that sometimes justice and murder are the same thing. But here's the question nobody wants to ask. Were they right? When you see evil, that extreme, that industrial, that calculated, do the rules still matter? Or is there a point where vengeance becomes the only moral response? This isn't a story about heroes. This isn't a story about villains. This is a story about what happens to good men when they're forced to look at hell. Welcome to Beyond the Silence. Before we dive into one of World War II's most controversial moments, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Beyond the Silence brings you the stories they didn't want you to know, the moral complexities they couldn't fit into textbooks. If that matters to you, subscribe now. The men of the 45th Infantry Division weren't bloodthirsty killers. They were ordinary Americans, farm boys from Oklahoma, factory workers from Detroit, college kids who'd enlisted after Pearl Harbor. They'd fought through Italy, France, and Germany. They'd taken prisoners. They'd treated enemy wounded. They'd followed the Geneva Convention. They were professional soldiers. But Dachau changed them in minutes. The 45th had been advancing toward Munich when they received reports of a large installation near Dachau. Intelligence suggested it was a work camp. The word extermination hadn't reached them yet. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks led his men toward the complex. As they approached, they saw a railroad siding. 39 boxcars sat motionless. Sparks ordered a squad to investigate. What they found defied comprehension. The boxcars contained approximately 2,300 corpses. Men, women, children. They'd been locked inside without food or water. The train had been traveling from Buchenwald and had been abandoned by SS guards days earlier. The prisoners inside had died of thirst, starvation, and exposure. Some showed signs of cannibalism. The living had tried to eat the dead. Survivors, barely alive, were mixed with corpses. The American soldiers were combat veterans. They'd seen death. But this was different. This was systematic. This was intentional suffering on an industrial scale. Technical Sergeant Henry Wells later testified that he saw a soldier sit down and start sobbing uncontrollably. Another machine gunner vomited and couldn't stop shaking, but most of them went silent. That silence was worse, because inside that silence something was changing. The rules they'd followed were evaporating, being replaced by something colder, something Old Testament. They continued toward the main camp. The gates were still manned by SS guards. The commandant had fled, but about 500 SS personnel remained. Second Lieutenant Heinrich Vicker made a decision. He would surrender formally, militarily, correctly. He put on his dress uniform. He polished his boots. He walked toward the Americans with a white flag. Wicker believed this would be a standard military surrender, that he'd be treated as an officer, protected by international law. He announced, "I am Second Lieutenant Heinrich Vicker. I hereby surrender this camp to the United States Army. The American officer he addressed looked at Wicker's clean uniform, his polished boots, his well-fed face, then looked back at the boxcars visible in the distance. According to witness accounts, the American officer spat directly in Wicker's face. The formal surrender did not proceed as Wicker had imagined. The Americans entered the camp proper. What they found made the death train look merciful. 30,000 prisoners, skeletal, diseased, barely human. Barracks designed for hundreds holding thousands. A crematorium still containing partially burned bodies. Rooms filled with personal belongings, suitcases, shoes, children's toys, the evidence of systematic murder on a scale that exceeded comprehension, and everywhere, SS guards, some trying to flee, some trying to surrender, some trying to blend in with prisoners. The prisoners saw the Americans and rushed the fences screaming in multiple languages. Some collapsed from the effort. Some died from the excitement, their bodies too weak. But while the prisoners celebrated, the American soldiers were hunting because they'd made a decision, not a formal decision, not an ordered decision, but a decision nonetheless. The SS guards weren't going to make it to a prisoner of war camp. Near what became known as the coal yard, approximately 50 SS guards attempted to surrender. They lined up, raised their hands, shouted phrases they thought would save them. Hitler kaput! War over! They were placed against a brick wall. According to multiple accounts, the order came from Lieutenant Jack Bushyhead, a Cherokee officer from Oklahoma. Other accounts dispute this. What's not disputed is what happened next. Private William Walsh set up a .30 caliber machine gun, aimed it at the line of SS guards. The Germans started to panic. Some shouted about the Geneva Convention, some begged. Walsh looked to his lieutenant. The lieutenant nodded. Walsh opened fire. The sustained burst lasted approximately 10 seconds. When the smoke cleared, the wall was splattered with blood and coal dust. Most of the Germans were dead. Some were wounded, crying, trying to crawl. American soldiers walked among them, firing single shots into anyone still moving. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks heard the shooting. He came running. He saw his men standing over bodies, still firing. Sparks drew his pistol and fired into the air. "Cease fire! What the hell are you doing?" The soldiers looked at him. One machine gunner was crying. "Colonel, they deserved it. You saw the train." Sparks ordered the shooting stopped, but he was too late, and part of him understood why it had happened. The coal yard wasn't the only execution site. At Tower B, SS guards climbed down from their watchtower with raised hands. American soldiers shot them off the ladder. The bodies fell into the moat. Soldiers then walked to the edge and emptied magazines into the water. At the hospital barracks, troops found an SS doctor who'd conducted experiments. He was beaten to death with rifle butts. Near the commandant's house, 3 SS officers were found hiding in a cellar. They were dragged out and executed. But the Americans weren't the only ones seeking vengeance. The prisoners found SS guards trying to hide. These guards were beaten to death with shovels, with rocks, with bare hands. The prisoners also found capos, fellow prisoners who'd collaborated with the SS. One was drowned in a latrine. Another was literally torn apart. American soldiers watched these executions. Some looked away. Some smoked cigarettes impassively. When one lieutenant asked whether they should intervene, his sergeant replied, "I didn't see anything. Did you?" For approximately 2 hours, Dachau operated outside the law. Eventually, Sparks restored order. He locked the surviving SS guards in a secure area. But the damage was done. The photographs had been taken. The bodies were there. Several days later, an investigation team arrived, led by Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Whitaker. Whitaker interviewed soldiers, examined execution sites, collected photographs, and compiled a report titled Investigation of Alleged Mistreatment of German Guards at Dachau. The report was damning. It concluded that American troops had violated the Geneva Convention, that prisoners of war had been executed without trial, The report recommended courts-martial for multiple officers and enlisted men. The report traveled up the chain of command and landed on General George S. Patton's desk. Patton read the report, looked at the photographs of executed SS guards, then looked at the photographs of the death train. Patton was known as a strict disciplinarian, but this was different. Patton summoned the investigating officer. "What is this?" Patton reportedly said. "Sir, it's evidence of war crimes committed by American personnel," Whitaker replied. Patton's response has become legendary. "War crimes? You send men into a place like that, they see what was done there, and you expect them to follow a rule book? What happened wasn't murder. It was justice." Patton had options. He could convene courts-martial, he could quietly discipline the men, or he could do nothing. Patton chose the third option. According to some accounts, he burned the report. According to others, he ordered it buried in classified archives. Either way, no charges were filed. No courts-martial were convened. The official position became that the killings were the result of combat chaos. General Eisenhower was briefed on the situation. He could have overruled Patton. Instead, Eisenhower looked at the photographs of the death train and considered what it would mean to court-martial American heroes for killing concentration camp guards. He let it go. The investigation was officially closed. The soldiers involved returned home. Lieutenant Jack Bushyhead went back to Oklahoma, never spoke publicly about Dachau, and died in 1977 without facing charges. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks went on to become a Colorado Supreme Court justice. So here's the question that makes this story so uncomfortable. Were they justified? The easy answer, the legal answer, is no. The Geneva Convention is clear. Prisoners of war cannot be executed. What happened at Dachau was, by definition, a war crime. Multiple war crimes. If we hold ourselves to the same standards we applied at Nuremberg, then the Americans at Dachau violated those same laws. But law and morality aren't always the same thing. The SS guards at Dachau weren't soldiers in any traditional sense. They were participants in genocide. They'd tortured, starved, and murdered thousands. And when liberation came, they expected to be treated as prisoners of war, protected by the same international laws they'd spent years violating. Is there a point where evil is so extreme that responding with legal precision feels like its own kind of injustice? The soldiers at Dachau didn't plan to commit war crimes. They weren't ordered to execute prisoners. They were men who walked into the absolute worst humanity could create, and they snapped. The psychological term is acute stress reaction. The human term is they couldn't take it anymore. Consider what they'd seen in 2 hours. Thousands of corpses on a death train, evidence of cannibalism, 30,000 living skeletons, a crematorium still warm, and then they saw the perpetrators. Clean uniforms, polished boots, well-fed faces, some arrogant, some expecting fair treatment. That contrast broke something in those soldiers. The counter-argument is that law matters most when it's hardest to follow, that if we abandon legal principles in response to atrocities, we become no better than the atrocity makers, that executing prisoners, no matter how despicable, is murder, and murder can't be justified by what the victims did. This argument has merit. If we say the Dachau executions were justified, we're saying there are circumstances where war crimes are acceptable. Once you open that door, where does it stop? But here's what complicates it further. The SS guards were going to face justice anyway. They'd have been tried, convicted, and many would have been executed after proper legal proceedings. So the American soldiers didn't prevent justice. They just expedited it. They delivered rough justice instead of procedural justice. Does that distinction matter? Legally, yes. Morally, it's harder to say. There's also the question of what the executions achieved. They didn't bring back the dead, they didn't undo the suffering, but they sent a message to the surviving prisoners. A message that their tormentors wouldn't simply be arrested and fed and protected, that there would be immediate, visceral consequences. For people who'd spent years convinced the world had abandoned them, watching their torturers executed might have been the first moment they believed justice still existed. Is that worth violating the Geneva Convention? Patton and Eisenhower made their decisions based on practical considerations. Court-martialing American soldiers for killing concentration camp guards would have been a propaganda disaster. It would have demoralized troops. So they chose institutional silence. They chose to protect their soldiers rather than prosecute them. Was that leadership or covering up war crimes? The soldiers themselves had to live with what they'd done. Some, like Private Walsh, expressed no regrets. Others were haunted. Some drank themselves to death. There's no evidence that any felt they'd done something morally wrong, but several felt they'd done something that changed them forever. Today, Dachau is a memorial. Thousands visit every year to pay respects to the victims. There's no memorial for the approximately 50 SS guards executed by American soldiers. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves. History has largely forgotten them. But their deaths still pose a question we can't ignore. In the face of absolute evil, does absolute law still apply? Or is there a point where human justice, even violent human justice, becomes more moral than legal procedure? This isn't a comfortable question. Both answers lead to dangerous places. If we say yes, the executions were justified, we're accepting that war crimes can be moral under extreme circumstances. If we say no, we're saying that even after witnessing genocide, professional soldiers should have arrested the perpetrators and ensured they received a fair trial. Maybe there's no right answer. Maybe the truth is that Dachau represented a moral event horizon where normal ethical calculations broke down, where good men did bad things in response to evil things, and we can understand why without being able to fully justify it. Thank you for watching Beyond the Silence. This is the kind of story that doesn't have easy answers, and that's exactly why it matters. History isn't simple. War isn't simple. And the questions posed by Dachau are still relevant today. If you found this exploration valuable, if you believe in confronting the uncomfortable truths of history, subscribe to Beyond the Silence right now. Hit that like button if this made you think. Leave a comment telling us where you stand on this impossible question. Were the executions at Dachau justified? There's no wrong answer, but there might not be a right one either. Turn on notifications because every week we bring you the stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about World War II. The stories they tried to bury. The moral complexities they couldn't explain. The truth that exists beyond the silence.